Okay, next we are going to look at exercise 12. If G is a group and H, K are two subgroups of finite indices in G, prove that their intersection, which we already know is a subgroup from exercise 1, is also of finite index in G. Additionally, can you find an upper bound for the index of this intersection in G? Okay, so let us see the solution. Now, before we write the solution, we are going to devise a notation for the set of all right cosets of a subgroup in a group. In fact, in one of the previous exercises, we used a notation G divided by that subgroup, and we mentioned there that the source of this notation can be found in this solution. So let us start by defining that. For any subgroup L of G, we denote the set of all right cosets of L in G by this symbol, G by L. Okay. Now with this notation we are going to define a function, and here the solution starts actually. Define a function from this set into this Cartesian product G by K. So this is the set of all right cosets of H intersection K in G. This is the set of all right cosets of H in G, and this is the set of all right cosets of K in G. So a right coset of H intersection K in G looks like this, where A is an element of G. It will be mapped by F onto an ordered pair of right cosets. The first coordinate should be a right coset of H in G, and the second one should be a right coset of K in G. Precisely these right cosets, HA and KA. So the output does belong to the second set. Now we have to prove that the function is well defined in the usual sense that equal inputs should give us equal outputs. So we take two inputs and assume them to be equal. Such that B. I need some ink. I'm running out. Now you recall one of the exercise solutions that we did previously. There we found an equivalent condition for two right cosets to be equal. Then AB inverse belongs to H intersection K. It is that exercise where an implication was given as a hypothesis and we were asked to prove that GH G inverse is contained in H for every element G in the group. So it's that one. You can remember this by thinking of the situation like this. You multiply both sides from the right hand side by B inverse. Here you will have E, which will vanish inside H intersection K, but here you will have AB inverse. So that AB inverse should also belong to H intersection K. So AB inverse belongs to H intersection K, which implies AB inverse belongs to H and AB inverse belongs to K. Thus, just like we can conclude this one from this one, we have seen in that previous exercise, which one I don't exactly remember. From here also we can conclude that one. It's an equivalent condition. This happens if and only if this happens. Thus, so from this one we can conclude that HA is equal to HB. And KA is equal to KB. So we have the F image of this right coset, which is HA, KA equal to HB, KB, which is nothing but the F image of this right coset. So we have shown that if inputs are equal, then outputs are also equal. Thus, F is well defined. Next we are going to show that F is 1 to 1. For that though, we will, just like this one, we will consider two elements in the domain, but this time we are not going to assume that they are equal, but rather that their F images are equal. From that assumption we then have to prove that the elements are equal. That would show us that the function is 1 to 1. So let us take something else this time. H intersection K D belong to this. Such that their F images are equal. So the F image of this one should be equal to the F image of the other one. Then what is the F image of this one? The ordered pair HC, KC, and the F image of this one is the ordered pair HD, KD. this implies we have to write many things. So instead of using words, I am going to use this logical, the implication symbol from mathematical logic. So this implies HC is equal to HD, and we can write words in between, that does not hurt. KC is equal to KD. That in turn implies CD inverse, we are again using that equivalent condition, and this one implies CD inverse belongs to K. Moving on, this implies CD inverse belongs to H intersection K, and that finally implies that these two right cosets are equal. So the function is one-to-one or injective. Now, finiteness of the indices of H and G, H and K in G implies these sets are finite, because indices denote number of right cosets, and these are sets of right cosets. Hence, their Cartesian product is also finite. We know that the Cartesian product of two finite sets is finite. But note that we have a one-to-one function from the set of all right cosets of H intersection K in G into this set, since f from 2 this is one-to-one is finite. Okay, how are we concluding finiteness of the domain from the finiteness of this set and one-to-oneness of F? For that, you need to think of the situation in terms of a small figure. This is the first set, and this is the second set. It is given that the function is one-to-one. So that means every element in the second set has at most one input from which it is coming. I am saying at most because there may be some elements which are not outputs of any input. In other words, the function f may not be onto. We have only proved that it is one-to-one. You can clearly see that is the case. For example, if you consider the ordered pair HA comma H, say something else, A dash, where what I am writing, KA dash. this Ka dash is not equal to Ka, say, then this will not appear as the output of any element in the domain. So there are cosets of, there are ordered pairs in this second set which are not coming as outputs of the elements in the first set. Still it is given that we have found that the second set is finite. So from the figure you can clearly see that the first set should also be finite, because each element in the first set is bringing a different image in the second set. So if the first set is infinite, then we should have infinitely many elements in the second set as outputs, which is not possible because the second set is finite. That's why the first set should also be finite. And from this situation you can also see that the number of elements in the first set is actually less than or equal to the number of elements in the second set. Actually it's less than, but we don't need that strict inequality. The point here is that there are at least that many elements in the second set as many elements we have in the first set. So that's why we are concluding that this is finite and there is something more. And index of H intersection K in G is nothing but the number of elements in this set, that is the number of distinct right cosets of H intersection K in G. This is because of that one-to-one function less than or equal to the number of elements in this Cartesian product G by H, and this is G by K, whose number of elements we already know is nothing but the product of these two numbers. And the first one is the index of H in G, and the second one is the index of K in G. So we have not only proved that there are finitely many right cosets of H intersection K in G, or that the index of H intersection K in G is finite, but this is an upper bound for that index. So here the solution ends. Then we move on to the 13th exercise. If A belongs to G, when you see G without anything else, you just see the symbol capital G, you have to assume that here G is a group. If A belongs to G, define a subset of G denoted by n of A, and it is defined to be the set of those elements in the group that commute with A. Okay. Now we have to prove that this NA is actually a subgroup of G. Show that NA is a subgroup of G. NA is usually called the normalizer or centralizer of A in G. Okay. So we have to prove that this is a subgroup. Before we verify the equivalent conditions for a subset to be a subgroup, we have to make sure that this is non-empty. Never forget that. Okay. Note that E belongs to NA and hence NA is a non-empty subset of G. E belongs to NA because E commutes with A. EA is equal to AE. This we get from the definition of a group itself, where we have that axiom that says that there is an identity element. That axiom tells us that both of these products should be equal to A. So that's how NA is non-empty. Now let X and Y be two elements in NA. We have to show that their product is in NA and that the inverse of X is in NA. Then X commutes with A, Y also commutes with A. Hence, what about X, Y, A? Because of associativity, we can write it as X times YA, but in place of YA, you can write AY. Again, use associative law to write the product like this. Now, in place of XA, we can write AX. Using associativity law for one final time, we get this. So XY does commute with A. Which implies XY belongs to NA. Now we have to prove that X inverse also commutes with A. From XA equal to AX, we can multiply on both sides of this equation from the, say, left hand side by X inverse. So doing that gives us X inverse XA is equal to X inverse AX. This implies X inverse XA, X inverse AX using associative law. That one implies this one will be EA equal to X inverse AX, and that further implies A is equal to X inverse AX. And now what we do, we multiply on both sides from the right hand side by X inverse. Thus, AX inverse is equal to, or you can replace this A with this expression, AX inverse A times, okay, what am I writing? X inverse A times X inverse. Yeah, I am replacing for A. So now I will have, because of associative law, X inverse, and this is equal to x inverse A times E, and that is equal to x inverse A. So x inverse also commutes with A. Which implies this belongs to NA. Thus, NA is a subgroup of G. Then exercise 14. If H is a subgroup of G, then by the centralizer CH of H in G, we mean the following set. It is the set of those elements in G that commute with every element in H. Prove that CH is a subgroup of G. One can there are two different ways of solving this one. Note the distinction between centralizer of a single element and centralizer of a subgroup. Centralizer of a single element, its definition is that it is the set of those elements that commute with that particular element. But centralizer of a subgroup is the set of those elements that each one of them commutes with all the elements of the subgroup. One method of showing this is of course just like this. You show first of all that this is non-empty, and then you take two elements in this set, prove that their product as well as the inverse of any one of them belong to this subset. That will prove that it's a subgroup. That is proving it from scratch. However, there is a very interesting observation that can be used to prove it in a much more brief manner. We claim that CH is actually the intersection of all the normalizers of the elements of H. What will this give me if, say for example, I can prove this? Then this will tell me two things. First of all, by the previous exercise, each NH is a subgroup, and by exercise 1, this arbitrary intersection of subgroups is a subgroup. So I only need to show that this is true, and that is in fact actually true. If you think about the condition here and try to match that with whatever you had in the previous exercise, you will see that this is automatically true. Anyway, we have to prove it. Let x belong to CH, then XH is equal to HX for all H belonging to H. Now forget about this for all H belonging to H. This H, think of this H as a single element in H, and in fact forget the fact that it's coming from H. You just think of H as an element and go to the previous exercise and look at the definition of the normalizer of H. By definition, it's the set of those elements in G that commute with that element H, and X is one such element. So that means X will belong to the normalizer of H. This implies X belongs to the normalizer of H. Now bring back the fact that H is actually any element of H. So you write for all H belonging to H. So now you can see why this X belongs to the intersection. It belongs to every such subgroup. Thus, thereby proving that CH is contained in this intersection. Conversely, let Y be any element in this intersection. Okay, then Y belongs to NH for all H belonging to H by the definition of this intersection. This is NH. Okay, still it's not. Let me write it properly. Y belongs to NH. This implies what happens when Y is in NH? Y commutes with the element H. YH is equal to HY, but this is true for all H belonging to H. That means Y commutes with every element of capital H. Hence, Y belongs to CH, proving that the intersection is also a subset of CH. Hence the claim that CH is equal to this. By the previous exercise, NH is a subgroup of G for all H belonging to H. Hence by exercise 1, which exercise 1 means the extra remark that comes with it. Can you see that the same proof shows that the intersection of any number of subgroups of G, finite or infinite, is also a subgroup. So from that one, CH is a subgroup of G. Now one may object to this way of